Bill, we kind of got into this before the break, but I want to, again, kind of wear the devil's advocate hat for a minute, because I can understand some of the frustration that folks out there might be having. Sure. And in fact, someone mentioned this to me in a conversation recently about these issues, kind of this feeling of exasperation of, if someone out there is thinking, well, why even have voters vote on ballot initiatives if the legislature can just repeal them or amend them? It's kind of like, well, what's the point? How would we respond to that?
Yeah, that's a reasonable question, and I think that the answer, there are kind of two answers. One is we have to understand where initiatives fit in the constitutional process, and then we want to think about, well, why do we even have them? So the first part of that question is relatively simple, and I tried to describe it a little bit earlier, but I'll try and maybe make it a little clearer. There, in our system, the U.S. Constitution, the Utah Constitution says that the legislative power is vested in the legislature and through the initiative and referendum process in the people themselves. Well, the question is, what is the legislative power? And the answer is it's the power to make laws. But there's a reason why the legislative power is usually considered the most important power under the Constitution. Enforcement power is good. We have a governor or at the national level, president. We have the court that's supposed to interpret laws and apply them in specific circumstances. But the legislative power is really where it's at. And if that's not tied to the people, then that's a problem. So it makes sense that the legislature, who are elected by the people, will have that power. And then it makes sense that if they can't get the attention of the legislature, they have another route to do that. And we don't have that at the national level, but we have it in many of the Western states, and it's become a normal process. But that ability to kind of say, hey, legislature, pay attention to us. If you're not going to pay attention, we're going to pass our own law and force you to pay attention. That's really can be very valuable, but in addition to that, we don't want to lose sight of the reason that we don't typically make all of our decisions by sort of getting all the people together and having a vote on every single little issue. We work through representatives because we want to make sure that our decisions are wise, but they're also flexible. Wise in the sense that we want to choose people who represent us in the legislature, who have time to focus and debate on issues, to do fact-finding, to find information out, to look at the way things have worked in the past, and to get constant feedback from those they represent. And we think, and I think we're right, I say we, I think what I kind of mean is the fictional we of the people who created the Constitution think that we want some deliberation to take place. We all recognize there's situations where, this was the nature of the concern that some of the framers of the U.S. Constitution had, that we don't have mob rule where, we're all angry about something at a given point in time. And so we say, fine, we're not going to let these people be citizens, or we're going to exclude these people because their rights seem so weird to us. We don't want to have that situation. We want to have a refining process where some discussion, and there's a requirement that people come to consensus with a little bit of compromise. That's a good thing. The legislative process is really good for that, creating consensus, requiring compromise. And that's why the legislative power is given to the legislature, the representative branches, to administer, because it will secure those goods. The initiative process has a different kind of good that it's promoting, and that good is to make sure that the legislature doesn't become too out of touch with what people want. But the Constitution does not create in the initiative power the ability to bind the legislature from ever making decisions in the future on whatever issue that the initiative addressed. Why don't we just say, hey, you have to do it because the people said it? Well, number one, people change their minds over time. That often happens. Second, the situations change. You could say, hey, we want a law that is passed by the citizens that say that funding for a certain program should be. But what happens if the economy takes a totally different direction, and we decide we've got to make a change to stay solvent? Those are kind of situations where you have to have the ability to change and adapt to circumstances, to changes in public opinion, to the lessons that you learn from experience. All of those things are protected in our system, which gives both the people directly through initiatives and the deliberative process of the legislature to make decisions. When you have both, we're safe. But if you don't, you're going to get things out of balance. And I think that's why we don't want to just always get what the people want at one point in time.
Can I draw attention to kind of 2 points you were making that stand out to me? Because to be honest, I was coming into this conversation, and as I've watched this issue unfold on the news, sometimes, and this is just my own personal view, kind of wearing a policy-oriented hat of, I don't get the appeal of ballot initiatives as a policy-making process, as a process to sort of get some political victories on issues that folks may feel like the legislature is ignoring. I understand that. But from the standpoint of just what kind of process makes good public policy, I'm skeptical of ballot initiatives because it's just a straight up or down vote that goes on the ballot, and then you have everyone vote on it. Whereas to your point, so the deliberative nature of the legislature and just any legislature in any state, it's hard to get a bill passed. It takes a lot of work. A lot of people have to review it, representing various perspectives. And so the deliberative nature, the thorough nature of the legislative process in general has been really important. It's been really good. And so if I kind of bring that skepticism of ballot initiatives, but then hearing you describe it in that way, that it's, I think the term you used was another relief valve.
Yeah.
That this is a mechanism by which the people can sort of force the legislature to say, hey, we care about this issue. We want you to pay attention to this. Here's something that is passed via ballot initiative. That makes sense to me. I think that's compelling. But as long as, I like what you said, that you need both of those things. And I also want to just ask you to articulate again the point of correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, but the state constitution of Utah basically says that state law can be made by one of two ways. Number one, the legislature can pass a bill and the governor can sign it. Number two, the people, through the ballot initiative process, can run an initiative, and if that passes, that becomes law. Does the Constitution give any difference to either of those as far as their binding effect, kind of the force of law moving forward?
Yeah, excellent question. And the answer is no. That's where the Supreme Court has been wrong in some of its decisions on this point, particularly the last summer, the 2024 decision about the nature. They kind of created a system where without the approval of judges, the legislature can't actually amend or repeal or even deal with something that's passed by ballot initiative. And if you think about it, the exact concerns that you raised are the reason we don't want to add that in. We don't want to add it in the Constitution by judicial mandate, because that's not the role of the courts to do that. But we also don't want to add that in because it then undercuts, dilutes, or even destroys that deliberative process, which we need. When we want to make change, it's good to get attention, to draw attention of our fellow citizens and of the legislature. We feel strongly about this, but we want to build consensus around ideas that work over time and that can be adjusted when needed. And the legislative process does that. The Constitution creates a way that the people can always keep the legislature sensitive to them beyond just passing bills and all of that. The most important protection, and this is the one we have at the national level exclusively, is the ability to choose representatives. So sometimes people say, well, why do we pass that initiative when it's not going to be paid attention to? Well, the answer is because we can use the initiative as an excuse to not do the hard work of being citizens, which is to find and educate the legislators who represent us and ensure that they're actually doing what we need them to do, deliberatively, working together with others, building support for an idea that many people approve, that benefits the majority of the people, and because of that is likely to stay in place. When you have a ballot initiative that's sort of a one-off thing, that you get a lot of attention. They sort of seem to be making a decision, but then a couple of years later, situations change, opinions change. You may have emergencies that occur, and you have to make the change. The ballot initiative is not a great process for that kind of situation. It's much better to just begin by saying, hey, pay attention, do something about this, let the legislature do that, but do it through the norms of compromise, do it through the norms of building broad support, of a support that's going to last not just for a short period of time where we're upset about something, but into the future when we realize, hey, this is a policy that basically benefits all of us, and we don't want to go back. And again, those two things don't have to be exclusive, but I do think that the Constitution wisely does not limit the legislative power of the legislature itself that's elected by the people. It does, by contrast, limit to some degree the power of the citizen initiated ballot initiatives, because it doesn't have those same benefits that the legislative process is intended to preserve.
Bill, we're almost out of time. There's kind of put a bow on all of this as I'm thinking about the way, like really simple ways we can be talking about this with others we might come into contact with as this stuff continues to percolate through the news. And I'm kind of thinking of it in these terms that, and this applies to this sort of bundle of debates that we're having here as a state, as well as in other states. And honestly, I think this framework could apply to any debate of any political or policy issue. And what I mean is this, that there are kind of three questions that are at play here. And again, in my simple, non-lawyer kind of brain, number one, what the rules are. Number two, what the rules should be. And number three, what the policy outcome is. And it seems to me that far too many of us here in Utah and across the country, we skip over question one, what the rules are. And we go right to the third question of what the policy outcome is.
Yeah.
We ignore the first question of what the rules are, and sometimes we gloss over the question of what the rules should be. There's so much focus on just, well, I want the political policy outcome that I think is good. And, whatever mechanism gets me there is a good mechanism. And that seems concerning to me, because we first need to have a clear-eyed conversation about, no, this is what the rules are. In other words, what the Constitution says, the text of the Constitution.
Yeah.
Once we're clear on that, which should be pretty straightforward because it's written down,
right,
then we can have a debate about what the rules should be, only in the context of following the rules as they are to amend the Constitution or amend the law. And then when we've done those things, then we can really have a debate about the policy outcome, as long as we're filtering it through those first two questions. Does that capture it? Does it miss anything?
No.
Give us sort of a message to take as we're talking to folks about this.
No, I think you're exactly right. I was thinking about that as you were saying. How would or you've been asking a couple times questions, and I've thought, yeah, I've had people ask me those exact questions, and I've even had some of my own exact same questions, and trying to think through them. One of the things I think you're right. We've always got to go back, and interesting, the Utah Constitution has a sort of unusual provision that says, it's good occasionally to go back to basic principles. And what the basic principle is that the Constitution constitutes us as a people, as a decision-making people, as people who have to live together peacefully, constructively, respecting the rights and humanity of every person. And so we establish a Constitution that is likely to produce that result. So when someone says, well, I think we ought to do this, the first question really is, well, can we do that? And then how do we do that? And I don't think it may initially seem a little obnoxious, but I think initially when people say, well, I really hate that, the legislature doing this or that, a really good question would be to say, well, what does the Constitution say about this? Because the Constitution may say something that's exactly relevant to that. Sometimes the legislature shouldn't be doing something they're doing because the Constitution says not to. And sometimes the legislature is doing the right thing, even if we don't like it, because the Constitution gives them authority to do that. But the Constitution itself becomes the framework, or the foundation is a better way of saying that, to every other decision. And if we carefully look at it, try to sort of faithfully apply that to our circumstances, then we can move on to the next question of sort of what would be a good thing to accomplish, and then what specific goals do we want to enact. And again, I think the thing that's powerful that we forget is that the results that we get on policy issues are likely to be not only smarter but longer lasting if we follow the constitutional process, which is meant to refine out. It's meant to sort of our prejudices or our laziness or whatever. It's meant to sort of work around that, to limit the destruction that can be done by people who are not thinking carefully or not willing to do the hard work of convincing our neighbors, hey, I think this is a good idea, and this person will represent us to enact those laws. So it's harder work for us, but it's a better result. Always going to be a better result if we follow the constitutional process.
And when doing that, the last thought that comes to mind before we wrap up, Bill, is in the movie A Man for All Seasons about Sir Thomas More. I think you're probably the only one I've quoted it to on the podcast, just because it's very relevant. But there's a debate. It's an old movie, but I highly recommend it. It's very, very thoughtful and powerful. There's a point where they're asked to take this oath from the King of England, and Thomas More, I think his daughter is asking him, like, well, what is the oath going to mean? Or they're having some debate about it. And Thomas More, I just remember the line where he says, it means what the words say. And so he's basically saying, like, the text of this thing is what matters most. And that comes to mind in this conversation, that when we're having all these debates about, how to draw district boundaries or how to deal with any other policy issues, and debates about the rules of the game of how to enact various policy issues we care about, we can go back to the Constitution and the process by which we do all the great things we want to do in a state. It's what the words say. And that goes back to what you said before, that maybe that is at risk of being lost. I
think you're exactly right. A word I've thought a lot about in the last couple of years is the word integrity. And it's the integrity, the strength, the ability of the Constitution to do what it's intended to do. That only works if we don't second guess that process. That's the protection to us. If we preserve the integrity of the Constitution by focusing on its language and not trying to come up with sort of some other route to get what we want, whether that's through the courts, whether it's through the initiative process, whether it's through the executive taking over more power, whatever. Of course, that means that things will be harder, but the result is always better. And I think that is the insight that Robert Bolt, when he wrote that play, was trying to convey to us. It's very inspiring to think about that. Thanks for bringing that up again.
Thanks for watching that clip of Defending Ideas. For the full conversation, click the link in the description, and make sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your shows.